I was a tech adept when I first heard it. 3rd class, unremarkable, assigned to the maintenance crypts beneath Forge Quintus, where the old ones slept. That was 17 years ago. Though time has become difficult to measure now. The augmetics see to that they process duration differently than flesh does. Segments and intervals, rather than the smooth flow I once knew. But I remember that first night, with the clarity of engraved steel. I remember because it was the night I learned that some sounds should never be heard. The Forge world turned on a 26-hour cycle, artificial and precise. We maintenance crews worked the graveyard shift, which meant descending into the cathedral of eternal vigil when the great manufactorums above fell into their mandated rest period. The cathedral wasn't truly a place of worship, though it had been consecrated by a magos sanctified. It was a storage facility, a warehouse for heroes, a museum of meat and metal that had long since fused into something that transcended both. Dreadnoughts, 63 of them in various states of suspended animation, arranged in neat rows like bottles in a wine cellar. Some dated back to the heresy era, their sarcophagi covered in purity seals so old the wax had fossilized. Others were newer, their paintwork still bright, kill markings fresh enough that you could smell the promethium residue when you got close. My job, along with 11 other tech adepts, was to maintain their life support systems, monitor their dreaming cycles, and ensure that when the chapter needed them, they could wake. The cathedral smelled of sacred oils and coolant, incense and ozone. The air was precisely temperature-controlled at 15.3 degrees Celsius, cold enough that our breath misted before our faces, warm enough that the machinery wouldn't frost. Red emergency lighting provided minimal illumination, enough to work by, not enough to disturb the sleepers. We moved between the dreadnoughts in respectful silence, our footsteps echoing off the vaulted ceiling 50 meters above. I had been assigned to row 7, which contained 9 dreadnoughts of varying patterns. My responsibility was to check their nutrient feeds, verify the integrity of their neural connections, and record any anomalies in their REM patterns. The work was meditative, ritualistic. Each dreadnought had a data slate mounted beside its sarcophagus, displaying a steady stream of information: heart rate, brain activity, chemical balances, dreams. They all dreamed. That was the part they didn't tell you in training. Every dreadnought, no matter how old, no matter how many augmetics had replaced the original flesh, dreamed constantly. The Mechanicus recorded it all, archived every neural pattern, though no one I knew had ever been granted access to those files. The dreams of heroes are sacred, our supervisor Magos Brennus had told us during orientation. You will observe. You will not interpret. But of course we interpreted. How could we not? Working alone in the red darkness, surrounded by legends who murmured and twitched in their armored coffins, we couldn't help but wonder what they saw in those dreams. Did they relive their greatest victories? Did they remember being whole? Did they know, in whatever remained of their consciousness, what they had become? The sound started 3 weeks into my assignment. I was checking the nutrient flow on Dreadnought 7-4, a contemptor pattern named Ancient Mordius, when I heard it for the first time. A low vibration, barely audible, right at the edge of my hearing range. I froze, one hand on the access panel, and listened. It came again, not from Mordeus, but from somewhere else in the row. A hum, almost musical, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed too regular to be mechanical noise. I looked down the row, counting the massive forms in the darkness. 7, 1 through 7, 9, all showing green status indicators, all supposedly deep in their rest cycles. The sound continued. I pulled my data slate from my belt and activated its audio recorder, holding it up in the direction of the noise. For 30 seconds I stood there, barely breathing, while the recorder captured whatever it was. Then the sound faded, dying away so gradually that I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment it stopped. I should have reported it immediately. Protocol demanded it. Any anomaly, no matter how minor, was to be brought to a senior adept's attention. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was curiosity. Perhaps it was the fear that I would be mocked for reporting strange noises in the dark like a frightened child. Perhaps it was something else, something I didn't yet understand. Instead, I completed my rounds, checked off each dreadnought on my maintenance log, and returned to the surface at shift's end. In the harsh white light of the Tech Adept dormitory, I connected my data slate to a cogitator and played back the recording. The sound was there, captured imperfectly but recognizable. A low-frequency oscillation, varying between 87 and 143 Hz, pulsing in a rhythm of 3 short beats followed by 2 long ones. I ran it through a standard analysis algorithm. No matches in the Forge's audio database. No correlation with any known mechanical malfunction. No resemblance to Vox traffic or environmental noise. The algorithm classified it as source uncertain and filed it in the anomaly bin. I went to sleep thinking about that sound. It followed me into my dreams, a deep thrumming that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity, making my ribs ache. When I woke 6 hours later, I could still feel it, like a vibration that had lodged itself in my bones. The next shift, I went down early. 30 minutes before the official start time, while the day crews were still finishing their duties, I descended into the cathedral and made my way to row 7. The day shift lighting was brighter, revealing details I never saw at night. The intricacy of the Dreadnought's ornamentation, the hundreds of cables and tubes that connected them to the cathedral's systems, the way the dust settled on their armored carapaces in perfect horizontal lines that revealed how motionless they truly were. Ancient Mordius stood silent in his alcove, his sarcophagus sealed, his weapons locked in rest position. His data slate showed normal readings. I checked the others in the row, one by one, finding nothing unusual. Whatever I had heard, it left no trace in the monitoring systems. That night, the sound came again. This time I was ready. I had positioned myself in the center of row 7, equidistant from all 9 dreadnoughts, with my audio recorder active from the moment I entered. The sound began at 0217, exactly 3 hours into my shift. The same low frequency, the same pulsing rhythm. But this time I could localize it. The sound was coming from Dreadnought 77, a castroferum pattern called Ancient Voss. I approached slowly, my footsteps deliberate, watching the status indicators. All green. No deviation from baseline. The ancient warrior within gave no sign of disturbance. I placed my hand on the sarcophagus, feeling the cold metal against my palm. The vibration was there, subtle but undeniable, traveling through the adamantium shell. It felt almost like a heartbeat. Though the rhythm was wrong, too slow and too deliberate for the simple pulse of blood through vessels, the sound changed. The frequency dropped, becoming deeper, almost subsonic. I felt it more than heard it now, a pressure in my chest and head that made my teeth ache. My hand trembled against the metal. I should have pulled away, should have called for a senior adept, should have done anything except what I actually did. I accessed Ancient Voss's neural monitor. The screen showed me his brain activity, a cascade of colored lines representing different regions of consciousness. His dream patterns were active, spiking and dipping in complex waves. The data was supposed to be private, sacred, but I told myself I was only checking for malfunction, only doing my job. The patterns were beautiful. That was my first thought. They formed shapes that almost seemed intentional, geometric designs that repeated and evolved. I watched them for 10 minutes, transfixed, while the sound continued to emanate from the sarcophagus. The patterns and the sound were synchronized. Every pulse in the audio matched a spike in Ancient Voss's neural activity. He was making the sound, not his life support systems, not some mechanical fault. The Dreadnought himself, from somewhere deep within whatever remained of his organic brain, was generating this vibration. I checked the archive. 347 years, Ancient Voss had been entombed. 347 years of service to his chapter, of battle and glory, and endless duty. The records showed 86 major engagements, hundreds of minor actions, thousands of kills. He had been a sergeant before his mortal wounding, a leader of men, and now he was a walking tank that dreamed in sounds no human was supposed to hear. The sound stopped. I pulled my hand away from the sarcophagus as if burned. The neural patterns on the screen settled into gentler waves, and the status indicators remained green. Ancient Voss had returned to whatever passed for normal sleep in a being like him. I should have stopped investigating then. I should have recognized the warning for what it was, but I was young and curious, and I had been raised on Forge worlds where mysteries were meant to be solved through application of logic and study. I had no framework for understanding that some mysteries are gates that, once opened, cannot be closed. Over the next week, I documented 17 separate instances of the sound, always from one of the 9 dreadnoughts in row 7, though the source varied. Sometimes it was ancient Voss, sometimes it was ancient Mordius or ancient Thrace. 3 times it came from Dreadnought 7-2, a nameless Leviathan pattern whose records had been corrupted centuries ago. The sound itself varied slightly different frequencies, different rhythms, different durations, but it was always recognizably the same phenomenon. I began to notice patterns. The sounds came in clusters, one dreadnought making its noise, then another responding minutes or hours later. The frequencies sometimes harmonized, creating overtones that I could feel in my augmetic implants. The rhythms, when I mapped them out, formed sequences that seemed too complex to be random. They were communicating. The realization came to me on my 9th night in the cathedral, standing in the darkness between 2 dreaming giants. The dreadnoughts, trapped in their armored shells, unable to move or speak during their rest cycles, had found another way. They had learned to sing to each other in frequencies that bypassed their monitoring systems, that existed in a space too low or too subtle for their overseers to notice. What were they saying? What could beings like them possibly have to discuss? I became obsessed with the question. I started arriving earlier and staying later, volunteering for double shifts, anything to spend more time in the cathedral. I filled data slates with recordings and analysis, building a database of sounds and patterns. Magos Brenos noticed my dedication. "You show promise, Adept," he told me during a routine inspection. "Your maintenance logs are impeccable. Perhaps we should consider you for advancement." I thanked him, accepted the compliment, and said nothing about what I had discovered. I told myself I was waiting until I had more data, until I could present a complete analysis that would prove the value of my findings. But the truth was simpler and darker. I didn't want to share. The sounds were mine. The mystery was mine. Whatever the dreadnoughts were saying to each other, I would be the one to decode it. I began modifying my equipment. Small changes at first, boosting the sensitivity of my audio recorders, adding filters to isolate specific frequency ranges, creating algorithms to detect patterns in the noise, then larger modifications. I requisitioned a neural interface headset, claiming I needed it to better monitor the dreadnought's dream states. I installed haptic sensors in my gloves, so I could feel vibrations through touch. I even replaced one of my ears with an augmetic that could perceive a wider sound spectrum. The modifications helped. With my enhanced hearing, I could detect sounds I had missed before. The dreadnoughts weren't just humming at each other. They were creating complex acoustic structures, layered frequencies that combined into something larger. When 3 or 4 of them sang together, the harmonics produced standing waves in the cathedral's air, patterns of pressure and vibration that moved through space like invisible sculptures. I started to understand the basics. Long, low frequencies were questions or calls. Sharp, high pulses were responses or confirmations. Sustained tones that slowly changed pitch were stories or memories. The most complex sounds, the ones that involved multiple dreadnoughts singing in precise coordination, seemed to be something else entirely. Rituals, perhaps, or prayers. The cathedral became my world. I stopped attending the communal meals in the Tech Adept quarters. I slept in a maintenance alcove between shifts, just a few minutes of rest before returning to my observations. My fellow adepts noticed the change, but said nothing. Obsession was common among our kind. It was practically a job requirement. As long as I fulfilled my duties, they had no reason to intervene. I began to hear the sounds, even when I wasn't in the cathedral. Walking through the forge's corridors, I would catch phantom vibrations at the edge of perception. During my sleep periods, I dreamed in frequencies and waveforms. My new augmetic ear picked up harmonics in normal conversation that reminded me of the Dreadnoughts songs, making it difficult to focus on what people were actually saying. 3 months after I first heard the sound, I made a breakthrough. I had been analyzing the pattern of calls and responses, mapping which Dreadnoughts sang to which, looking for relationships. What I found was a network. Ancient Voss seemed to be a hub, receiving sounds from multiple sources and responding to each. Ancient Mordeus and Ancient Thrace formed a pair that sang almost exclusively to each other. The Leviathan, 7-2, was isolated, making sounds that no one answered, like a child calling into darkness. But there was one Dreadnought that never sang. 7-5, Ancient Kalan, a contemptor pattern that had been entombed for 412 years. His service record was extensive, his kill count staggering, but he never made a sound, never joined the nightly chorus. His neural patterns were active, he was dreaming like the others, but he remained silent. I became fixated on Ancient Kalan. Why didn't he sing? Was he unable to produce the sounds? Was he refusing? Or was he doing something else? Something I hadn't yet learned to detect. I started spending entire shifts watching him, monitoring his systems with obsessive detail. His heart rate, what remained of it, the few organic vessels still pumping blood through his partially preserved torso, was stable at 23 beats per minute. His neural activity showed normal dream cycles, perhaps even more active than the others. His nutrient consumption was within expected parameters. Everything about him was perfectly, boringly normal, except that he never sang. On the 100th night of my obsession, I made a decision that I knew, even then, was wrong. I was going to wake him. Not fully, I didn't have the authority or the knowledge to bring a Dreadnought to full consciousness. But I could stimulate his systems, increase his brain activity, perhaps bring him close enough to awareness that I could ask him directly about the sounds.